You wake up in the year 1347. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, you're a professional assassin. The straw beneath you shifts like old bones as you move on what passes for a bed. It's not a bed, of course, but a collection of moldy hay stuffed into a coarse, louse-infested sack. The air hits you immediately, a cocktail of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and human waste that seems to have permanently incorporated itself into the very walls of this cramped, windowless room you call home. Instinctively, your hand reaches for the dagger by your side, a rusty piece of iron more likely to give your victim tetanus than a clean kill. The blade is chipped from your last job when you had to saw through the thick winter cloak of a merchant who refused to die quietly. The memory turns your stomach, not from guilt, but from the rancid meat you ate afterward, the only payment you received for 3 days of stalking through frozen sewage. Forget everything you've seen in movies or read in books. There are no shadowy guilds with unlimited resources, no hooded figures gracefully leaping across rooftops, and no mysterious masters teaching ancient techniques in hidden monasteries. There is only you, covered in filth, likely dying of some undiagnosed disease, trying to earn enough coins to pay for your next meal, while avoiding the very real possibility of being drawn and quartered in the town square. The little morning light that seeps through the cracks in the rotting wooden walls reveals the true horror of your existence. Your hands are permanently stained with a mix of blood, dirt, and rust from your weapons. Your nails are crescent moons of black filth that no amount of washing could clean, assuming you had access to clean water, which you don't. The well in this part of town has been contaminated for months, but it's all you can afford. The water itself is a brownish liquid that smells of rot and tastes of metal and death. When you are desperate enough to drink it, which is daily, you do so knowing that each sip could be the one that kills you with dysentery or some other waterborne plague. But the alternative is to die of thirst, which is faster and possibly more painful than the slow decay of disease. Let's talk about what your profession actually involves. First, forget any notion of skill or honor. You are not an elite warrior trained in the deadly arts. You are, in essence, a desperate criminal willing to kill for money because you have no other options. Most people in your line of work are former soldiers who couldn't find a job after returning from whatever senseless war claimed their friends, or thieves who found that sometimes you have to eliminate witnesses. Your targets are not evil nobles or corrupt officials. They are usually common people. A baker who owes the wrong person money, a farmer's wife whose husband wants to remarry, or a merchant who has been asking too many questions about his partner's accounting. The reality is that most assassinations in medieval times were petty, brutal affairs driven by greed, jealousy, or simple business disputes. The smell of death follows you everywhere. It's not just the metallic aroma of blood, though that's certainly part of it. It's the scent of sweat, the fear of your victims, the stench of bowels emptying as life leaves a body, and the putrid odor of infection from wounds that don't heal properly because medieval medicine consists mostly of prayer and optimism. Your clothes reek of these encounters because you can't afford to replace them, and washing is a luxury that requires time, soap, and clean water, none of which are readily available. The fabric of your garments has become so saturated with the essence of violence that even when you do manage to rinse them in a stream or a bucket, the smell never completely goes away. It has become part of your identity, a calling card that announces your presence to anyone with a sensitive nose. Children flee when they catch your scent on the wind, and even hardened criminals give you a wide berth when you enter a tavern. The tools of your trade are crude and unreliable. Your primary weapon is that rusty dagger we mentioned, but you also carry a small cudgel for stunning victims, a piece of rope for strangling, and occasionally a vial of poison if you can afford it. Though medieval poison is more likely to make someone violently ill for days than to kill them quietly, most of the time, you're stuck with brute force and hoping your victim doesn't scream loud enough to wake the neighbors. The dagger itself tells a story of desperation and crude craftsmanship. The blade, originally about 8 inches long, has been shortened through repeated sharpening on rough stones. The edge is no longer straight, but wavy, following the contours of whatever makeshift sharpening surface you could find. The handle, wrapped in strips of leather torn from the clothes of previous victims, is slick with old blood and sweat, that has soaked so deeply into the material that it has become part of the weapon itself. Your cudgel is nothing more than a piece of oak ripped from a demolished building. Its surface is pocked with nail holes and stained with substances you'd rather not identify. It's heavy enough to crack a skull, but light enough to hide under your rough, scratchy cloak. The rope is a piece of rough hemp suitable for ship's rigging, but now repurposed for the grim business of ending human lives. Its fibers have darkened with age and use, and several strands have begun to fray, making it unreliable for any task requiring sustained pressure. Speaking of neighbors, let's talk about where you operate. Medieval cities are mazes of narrow, winding streets that double as open sewers. The ground beneath your feet is a mixture of mud, human waste, rotting food scraps, and the occasional corpse of a beggar who froze to death. Buildings lean precariously over these alleys, blocking out most sunlight and creating a perpetual world of twilight and shadows, perfect for your work, but terrible for your health. The architecture itself seems designed to harbor disease and despair. Houses are built so close together that you can touch the walls on both sides of the street simultaneously in many places. The upper floors of buildings jut out over the lower ones, creating dark tunnels where the sun never penetrates. These overhangs drip constantly with condensation, and worse, creating a perpetual rain of mysterious liquids that stains clothes and skin with substances you dare not contemplate too closely. The sounds of your environment are equally grim. There's the constant dripping of unknown liquids from above, the scuttling of rats that have grown brave enough to challenge cats for territory, the moans of the sick and dying from behind thin walls, and the occasional scream that might be someone being murdered or might just be a woman in childbirth. The mortality rates for both scenarios being roughly equivalent. At night, when you do most of your work, these sounds intensify and multiply. The darkness brings out creatures, both human and non-human, that prefer to avoid daylight. You hear the whispered conversations of other criminals planning their own schemes, the rattling cough of plague victims trying to find sleep, the scratching of rats in the walls, and sometimes the wet, sliding sounds that might be a body being disposed of in a nearby alley. Your living accommodations reflect your standing in society. You rent a corner of a room in the worst part of town, sharing the space with two other men who may or may not be criminals. You've never asked, and they've never offered the information. The room has no heating except for a small brazier that fills the space with suffocating smoke when the wind blows wrong. The walls are damp with condensation and something that might be mold, and the floor is packed earth that turns to mud whenever it rains, which is often. The brazier itself is a small metal bowl propped on 3 crooked legs, likely stolen from someone's kitchen. The fuel you burn in it is anything you can find, scraps of wood, dried dung, or occasionally paper if you can afford it. The smoke it produces is acrid and black, burning your eyes and lungs, but it provides just enough heat to keep you from freezing to death on the coldest nights. The smell of burning garbage mixes with all the other odors in your life to create an atmosphere that would make a healthy person vomit. Your roommates are equally desperate characters. One is a spicer whose hands were cut off for adulterating flour with sawdust during a famine. He now survives by begging and occasionally serving as a lookout for other criminals. The other claims to be a discharged soldier, but his stories about military service change every time he tells them. He has the shakes from too much cheap alcohol and jumps at every unexpected sound. Neither of the men bathes regularly, and the 3 of you together create a miasma of human misery that would be suffocating if you weren't already used to living in filth. Sleep is a constant challenge, not just because of the physical discomfort, but because of the psychological weight of your profession. Every night, you are haunted by the faces of the people you have killed, not necessarily from remorse, but because violence has a way of embedding itself in memory. You dream of botched jobs, of victims who fought back harder than expected, and of the time you had to finish a target with your bare hands because your dagger broke mid-stroke. The dreams are vivid and recurring, replaying scenarios that mix memory with nightmarish imagination. Sometimes you relive successful kills, watching again as the light goes out of someone's eyes as they struggle against your rope or blade. Other times, your sleeping mind creates elaborate fantasies where your victims return from the dead to seek vengeance, their wounds still fresh, and bleeding as they chase you through endless labyrinths of medieval streets. The psychological impact of these night terrors extends beyond sleep. During your waking hours, you find yourself constantly looking over your shoulder, jumping at shadows, and misinterpreting innocent sounds as threats. The paranoia that keeps you alive in your profession gradually consumes your entire existence, making peaceful moments impossible and human connection almost unthinkable. The cold is your constant companion. Medieval buildings have virtually no insulation, and glass windows are for the rich. Your accommodation has openings covered with oiled cloth, which does little to keep the bitter wind out. During winter, which lasts for what feels like 8 months of the year, you sleep fully clothed and still wake up with ice in your beard. Frostbite is a real concern, and you've already lost the tip of a finger to the cold. The winter of 1347 is particularly brutal, with temperatures that seem to penetrate not just your inadequate shelter, but your very bones. Ice forms on the inside walls of your room, and your breath creates clouds. Even when you're huddled near the brazier, the cold makes your joints ache with an intensity that sometimes leaves you temporarily immobilized, a dangerous condition for someone whose survival depends on quick reflexes and sudden movements. Food becomes even scarcer during the winter months as preserved supplies run out and fresh items become impossible to obtain. The little you can afford is often partially frozen, requiring careful thawing over your pathetic fire before it becomes edible. Sometimes you are forced to gnaw on bread that is frozen solid, risking cracked teeth for the sake of nutrition. Your body has adapted to near starvation conditions, but the added stress of the extreme cold pushes you closer to the edge of survival with each passing day. Malnutrition affects every system in your body. The irregular and low-quality food, available to someone living on the fringes of society, lacks essential nutrients. Scurvy, from a lack of vitamin C, causes your teeth to fall out and wounds to heal poorly. Rickets, from vitamin D deficiency, creates bone deformities that make physical activity painful. Anemia, from an iron deficiency, causes weakness and fatigue that can be fatal in dangerous situations. Your body has become a map of nutritional deficiency and physical trauma. Your gums bleed constantly, leaving a metallic taste in your mouth that mixes with the flavors of whatever scraps you've managed to consume. Your teeth, those that are left, are loose in their sockets and cause constant pain. Several have already fallen out, leaving gaps that make eating even more difficult and speaking a little slurred. Protein deficiency shows up in your hair, which has become thin and brittle, often falling out in clumps when you run your fingers through it. Your skin has a grayish pallor and heals slowly, even from minor cuts, leaving you vulnerable to infection from every small wound. Your muscles have wasted away, leaving you weaker than you were even a year ago, though desperation and adrenaline can still provide bursts of strength when survival demands it. Your teeth are a constant source of pain. Dental health deteriorates quickly without access to proper care. A toothache can be debilitating, affecting sleep, nutrition, and concentration. Infected teeth can lead to blood poisoning and death. The medieval solution? Extraction with primitive tools and no anesthesia is often worse than the problem it's intended to solve. Your mouth is a landscape of broken stubs and infected cavities that make eating a torturous experience. The pain from your dental problems is sometimes so intense that it affects your ability to focus during work. You've lost opportunities for contracts because you were too distracted by the throbbing agony to properly plan or execute tasks. An infection from one particularly bad tooth has spread to your jaw, creating swelling that makes your face asymmetrical and marks you as someone who is clearly unwell. Joint problems develop from sleeping on hard surfaces, carrying heavy weapons, and the physical stress of violent confrontations. Arthritis in medieval times is not just uncomfortable, but potentially incapacitating. Hands that can't properly grip weapons or knees that won't support your body's weight can mean the difference between life and death. You wake up every morning feeling like an old man, though you're probably not more than 25. The dampness of your living conditions exacerbates these joint issues, creating a cycle of pain and stiffness that gets worse with each passing season. Your knees audibly crack when you stand up, and your shoulders ache from old wounds that never healed properly. The fingers of your weapon hand are becoming increasingly arthritic, making precise movements difficult and threatening to end your career through simple physical deterioration. The economic aspects of being a medieval assassin reveal just how desperate and precarious this existence really is. Contrary to popular imagination, assassination is not a lucrative profession in the Middle Ages. The market for murder is, in fact, quite limited and highly competitive. Most contracts come from petty disputes rather than grand political schemes. A typical job might pay the equivalent of what a skilled artisan earns in a week if the client actually pays, which is far from guaranteed. The mathematics of survival are brutal and unforgiving. A successful kill might bring in enough money to live comfortably for a month, but jobs are irregular and unpredictable. You can go weeks without work, during which time you still need food, shelter, and the basic tools of your trade. The feast or famine nature of the business means that even successful periods are shadowed by the knowledge that poverty and starvation are always just around the corner. Many people who want someone dead are themselves operating on the fringes of society and may not have the resources to pay a professional fee. Some clients offer payment in goods rather than coins, moldy bread, watered-down ale, or clothes that belong to previous victims. You've learned to negotiate these trades carefully, as the value of goods can be even more uncertain than the promise of payment. The overhead costs of the profession are higher than you might expect. Weapons require constant maintenance and eventual replacement. Medical treatment for wounds sustained during jobs can eat up weeks of earnings, assuming you can find someone willing to treat a criminal. And bribes to avoid arrest or to get information on targets represent a significant ongoing expense that can quickly consume any profit from successful contracts. The competition in the assassination market is fierce and often deadly. When jobs are scarce, assassins sometimes eliminate each other to reduce competition. This creates a paradoxical situation where the greatest threat to an assassin's life often comes not from their targets or law enforcement, but from others in their profession. You've learned to be as wary of other assassins as you are of city guards, knowing that professional rivalry can turn lethal without warning. The irregular nature of the work makes financial planning impossible. An assassin can go weeks without a contract, during which they must still pay for food and shelter. This leads to a feast or famine cycle, where any earnings are quickly spent on immediate necessities rather than saved for future security. The concept of retirement or long-term financial stability is utterly foreign to someone in your position. The lack of legal protections means that clients can and often do cheat their hired assassins. What is an assassin going to do? Take their grievances to court? File a complaint with the Merchants Guild? The power dynamic heavily favors the client, who holds all the cards in these transactions. You've been cheated out of payment more times than you can count, but the alternative to accepting these losses is often violence, which brings unwanted attention from the authorities. The geographical mobility that might seem like an advantage for someone in this profession is in fact quite limited. Travel is expensive, dangerous, and slow. Moving to a new city means starting from scratch, with no contacts, local knowledge, or established hiding places. Most assassins become stuck in the same location for their entire careers, watching their reputations become increasingly notorious until they become unemployable. The actual mechanics of killing someone in medieval times reveals just how crude and unreliable the entire enterprise is. Modern depictions often show elegant and silent kills, but the reality is far messier and more uncertain. Every assassination is a chaotic struggle with death, with outcomes often depending more on luck than skill or planning. Poison, the stereotypical tool of the assassin, is virtually useless in the medieval period. The compounds available are inconsistent in potency, difficult to administer without detection, and more likely to cause illness than death. You've tried using poison several times, with results ranging from complete failure to creating violently ill victims who survive to identify you to the authorities. The plants that supposedly contain deadly toxins are difficult to correctly identify and vary in potency depending on growing conditions, harvest time, and preparation methods. What might kill a rat may barely affect a healthy human adult, and the symptoms of plant poisoning are often so obvious that even medieval physicians can recognize deliberate poisoning. You abandoned attempts to use botanical toxins after several expensive failures nearly resulted in your capture. Arsenic and other mineral poisons may be available in some regions, but they are expensive and often contaminated, with other substances that reduce their effectiveness. The merchants who deal in such materials are themselves criminals who cannot be trusted, and the risk of being cheated or reported to the authorities makes these transactions extremely dangerous. Most importantly, mineral poisons work slowly and cause distinctive symptoms that make murder obvious to anyone investigating. The delivery methods for poison present additional challenges that make this approach nearly impossible for working. Assassins. Food poisoning requires access to the target's meals and knowledge of their eating habits. Most medieval people are suspicious of unfamiliar food, and the communal nature of most meals means that poisoning one person often affects others, creating witnesses and expanding the scope of the crime. Poisoning weapons is largely mythical. Most poisonous compounds break down or lose potency when exposed to air, and the amounts that can be applied to blade edges are insufficient for reliable results. You experimented with coating your dagger in various substances, but the results were so inconsistent that you learned to rely on the blade itself rather than any chemical enhancement. Bladed weapons present their own challenges that movie assassins never seem to face. Quality steel is expensive and difficult to obtain for someone operating outside of legitimate society. Most assassins make do with iron daggers that rust quickly, hold poor edges, and break at inconvenient moments. The human body is surprisingly resilient, and killing someone quickly with a knife requires precise knowledge of anatomy that most medieval assassins don't possess. Your current dagger is a perfect example of these limitations. The iron blade has been sharpened so many times that it is now significantly shorter than when you first acquired it. The edge chips easily against bone, and the tip has broken twice, requiring crude repairs that have weakened the entire structure. The handle is loose, held together with wire and hope, and the whole weapon feels unreliable in your hand. Stabbing someone effectively requires hitting vital organs or major blood vessels, but the human rib cage and layers of clothing provide significant protection against blade attacks. You've learned that multiple wounds are usually necessary to ensure death, which increases the time required for each kill and multiplies the opportunities for something to go wrong. The sounds of struggle and the amount of blood produced make stealth nearly impossible. Strangulation seems like a silent alternative, but it is in fact quite difficult and time-consuming. Victims rarely cooperate by holding still, and the process takes several minutes of sustained effort. All the while, the victim is free to scratch, bite, and make noise that can attract attention. Many assassination attempts fail because the victim manages to fight back effectively during the prolonged struggle required for manual strangulation. The rope you carry is theoretically useful for garroting, but the technique requires approaching the victim from behind and maintaining pressure for an extended period while they struggle violently. The hemp fibers are rough and difficult to grip when they become slick with sweat or blood. You've tried strangulation several times, but the physical demands and the noise created during the struggle make this method highly impractical for most situations. Blunt weapons create their own problems that demonstrate the raw reality of medieval violence. Cudgels and hammers are noisy, messy, and unpredictable. A blow that should be fatal may only injure, leaving a victim capable of identifying their attacker. The amount of blood produced by head wounds can be shocking and creates forensic evidence that is difficult to explain away. Your cudgel has seen extensive use, and its surface is stained with substances that tell the story of numerous violent encounters. The wood has absorbed blood and other fluids so completely that it has become permanently discolored. Several deep gouges mark places where the weapon struck bone or stone, and hairline cracks suggest that the wood is becoming brittle with age and stress. The human skull is surprisingly resilient, and blows that should be fatal often only injure the victim, leaving them conscious and able to identify their attacker. You've learned that multiple blows are usually necessary, which increases the noise and the time spent at the crime scene. The sounds of wood hitting bone echo in the narrow medieval streets, and the victim's screams can alert neighbors or passers-by. Environmental factors complicate every method and make consistent results nearly impossible. Medieval buildings are poorly constructed with thin walls and many occupants. Privacy is essentially non-existent, and witnesses are everywhere. The lack of artificial lighting means that most work must be done by torch or candlelight, which creates shadows and visibility problems while simultaneously announcing your presence to anyone nearby. The cramped conditions of medieval cities mean that violent struggles are likely to be overheard by neighbors living just inches away behind thin wooden walls. The sounds of fighting, breaking furniture, or bodies hitting the floor carry clearly through these inadequate barriers. You've learned to work quickly and violently, trying to end confrontations before the noise can attract attention. But this urgency often compromises precision and increases the likelihood of mistakes. Weather affects everything and can turn a planned assassination into a death trap for the assassin. Rain makes surfaces slick and ruins the reliability of weapons. Your dagger becomes harder to grip when wet, and the leather wrapping on the handle provides little traction. When sodden, wet rope stretches and becomes even more difficult to use effectively. Wooden cudgels can crack or become waterlogged, changing their weight and balance. Snow creates tracks that can be followed long after the crime, providing authorities with clear evidence of the assassin's approach and escape routes. The sound of footsteps on snow or ice can alert potential victims or witnesses. And cold makes manual dexterity difficult when precision is needed. Winter clothing restricts movement and makes weapon concealment more challenging. Wind carries sounds farther and can extinguish light sources at crucial moments, leaving the assassin in darkness when vision is essential. Extreme cold makes fingers numb and reduces manual dexterity, a serious problem when precision is required for weapon use. Hot weather increases body odor and makes heavy clothes suspicious, while also speeding the decomposition of corpses and requiring quicker disposal of evidence. The absence of forensic science might seem like an advantage, but it is, in fact, offset by the tight-knit nature of medieval communities. Everybody knows everyone else's business, and strangers are immediately noticed and remembered. Alibis are difficult to establish when your movements are constantly observed by neighbors who have nothing better to do than gossip about unusual activity in their area. The legal system in medieval times is simultaneously primitive and terrifyingly effective when it comes to dealing with criminals and suspects. While investigative techniques are crude by modern standards, the consequences of getting caught are so severe that they create a powerful deterrent effect that shapes every aspect of an assassin's behavior. Trial by ordeal is still practiced in many regions during the early medieval period, representing a form of justice that assumes divine intervention will reveal the truth. Suspected assassins may be subjected to trial by fire, where they must carry red-hot iron bars or walk on burning coals. The theory is that God will protect the innocent and allow the guilty to be burned, creating a system where survival requires either innocence or an exceptional tolerance for pain. You've heard stories of these ordeals from other criminals who witnessed them, descriptions that haunt your dreams and add another layer of terror to the constant fear of capture. The smell of burning flesh, the screams of the accused, the satisfied expressions of the watching crowds. These images reinforce your determination to avoid capture at all costs. Torture is routinely used to extract confessions, and medieval torture techniques are designed to maximize pain while keeping the victim conscious and able to speak. The rack stretches the body until joints pull apart. Thumb screws crush fingers slowly and methodically, and the strapado suspends victims by their arms twisted behind their backs. These devices are operated by specialists who understand human anatomy well enough to cause maximum agony without inducing unconsciousness or death. Most people confess to something under these conditions, whether they are guilty or not, leading to a system where torture becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of guilt. The knowledge that capture means certain torture and likely execution influences every decision an assassin makes, from the selection of targets to the planning of escape routes. The punishments for murder are designed to serve as public deterrence rather than rehabilitation, creating spectacles of suffering that entertain crowds while warning potential criminals about the consequences of their actions. Drawing and quartering involves tying the condemned person to 4 horses and having them pull in different directions until the body is torn apart. This process can take quite some time if the horses aren't properly motivated or if the victim's joints are particularly strong. Hanging is considered a merciful alternative, though the method of dropping has not yet been perfected. So most victims slowly strangle to death instead of having their necks cleanly broken. The process can take several minutes of conscious suffering, during which time the condemned person's struggles provide entertainment for the gathered crowds. Some executions become festivals, with food vendors and a carnival atmosphere surrounding the gallows. Public executions are major social events, and crowds gather to watch criminals die with an enthusiasm that demonstrates the harsh realities of medieval entertainment. The spectacle value of these events means that authorities have strong incentives to capture and punish high-profile criminals like assassins. A well-publicized execution can keep the populace distracted from their own problems for weeks while reinforcing social order through the demonstration of state power. The concept of legal representation does not exist for most criminal cases, creating a system where accused individuals must defend themselves against educated prosecutors while often being illiterate and unfamiliar with legal procedures. This power imbalance means that most trials are foregone conclusions, with conviction rates approaching certainty for anyone brought before the courts. The social consequences of being a known or suspected assassin extend far beyond legal concerns and create a form of living death that affects every aspect of existence. Medieval society is built on complex networks of relationships, reputation, and social standing. Once someone is marked as a criminal, they become essentially invisible to legitimate society while simultaneously becoming highly visible to law enforcement. Religious exclusion is perhaps the most profound form of social death in medieval times, cutting the assassin off from the central organizing principle of medieval life. The Catholic Church is the center of communal existence, providing not only spiritual guidance but also social services, education, and economic opportunities that become unavailable to known criminals. Assassins are typically denied access to the sacraments, which means they cannot marry, receive last rites, or be buried in consecrated ground. This spiritual isolation affects every aspect of life and extends beyond death, condemning the assassin to eternal damnation, according to medieval religious belief. The psychological weight of this exclusion is enormous in a society where religious identity provides the primary framework for understanding existence and mortality. Economic opportunities for known criminals are extremely limited, creating a downward spiral that makes legitimate employment increasingly impossible. Legitimate merchants will not do business with suspected assassins, partly out of moral concerns but mostly for practical ones. Being associated with criminals can damage their own reputations and business relationships. This economic isolation forces assassins to deal exclusively with other criminals, creating a closed system that offers no escape. Family relationships become complicated or impossible when involvement in assassination becomes known or suspected. Marrying an assassin puts a woman at risk of social exclusion, and any children would inherit their father's stigma. Most assassins remain unmarried, not by choice but out of necessity, as potential partners understand the social and legal risks of association with known killers. Those who had families before entering the profession often find themselves abandoned when their activities become known. Wives may flee with children to avoid the shame and danger of association, leaving the assassin completely isolated. The few who maintain family connections must live with the knowledge that their profession puts their loved ones at constant risk. Housing options are severely restricted, forcing assassins into the worst accommodations in the most dangerous neighborhoods. Landlords prefer tenants who will not attract attention from authorities or scare away other residents, leaving assassins with limited choices and requiring them to pay premium rates for substandard shelter. The concentrations of criminals in certain areas create communities of desperation, where violence and paranoia are the normal state of existence. Personal hygiene becomes both less possible and less relevant when social acceptance is already impossible. Without access to bathhouses, barbers, or clean clothes, assassins develop a distinctive appearance that marks them as outsiders. This visual stigma makes it difficult to blend in or to approach targets without arousing suspicion, creating a disadvantage that worsens over time. The smell of chronic unwashing mixes with the odors of violence and creates an olfactory signature that announces your presence long before you become visible. Even other criminals avoid close contact when possible, adding another layer of isolation to an already lonely existence. Every moment of a medieval assassin's life is colored by fear that goes beyond the normal concerns of medieval existence. Unlike common citizens who might worry about disease, famine, or warfare, assassins face threats from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a state of constant anxiety that never truly ends and gradually corrodes both physical and mental health. Fear of discovery by authorities is omnipresent, but far from the only concern that shapes daily behavior. Families and friends of victims often seek revenge, and they don't necessarily limit themselves to the actual perpetrator. Guilt by association means that anyone connected to a known assassin can become a target for vigilante justice, expanding the circle of potential enemies far beyond the immediate consequences of specific crimes. Associates, suspected accomplices, or even people who happen to live in the same area can become targets for revenge killing, creating a web of danger that extends beyond the assassin's own actions. A mindset of collective punishment means that successful assassins often find their neighborhoods becoming more dangerous as residents flee or arm themselves against potential retaliation. Other criminals represent another source of danger that demonstrates how even the criminal underworld rejects assassins. Information on contract killers is valuable, and rival assassins may eliminate competition while also earning rewards from authorities. Thieves and bandits see assassins as potentially lucrative targets, since they may be carrying payment from recent jobs or possess weapons that can be stolen and sold. The weapons that assassins carry for protection can become liabilities that attract unwanted attention from multiple sources. Getting caught with illegal weapons can result in severe punishment, even without evidence of specific crimes. But walking around unarmed in a medieval city is essentially suicide, especially for someone with numerous enemies. This creates a no-win situation where every choice carries significant risks and no option provides real safety. Disease represents, perhaps, the most democratic threat in medieval times, affecting everyone regardless of social status or criminal activity. However, assassins living in squalid conditions and lacking access to medical care are particularly vulnerable to plague, dysentery, pneumonia, and countless other illnesses that can kill as effectively as any human enemy. The irony of surviving multiple assassination attempts only to die from an infected cut is not lost on those in the profession. The poor nutrition and chronic stress that characterize an assassin's lifestyle weaken the immune system and make recovery from illness more difficult. Minor injuries that would heal quickly in healthy individuals can become fatal infections when the body lacks the resources to fight off bacterial invasion. Many assassins die not from violence, but from complications from untreated wounds or diseases that would be manageable with proper care. Starvation is a constant possibility that shapes every decision about spending money or taking risks. When contracts are scarce or payment is delayed, assassins can go for days without adequate food. Malnutrition weakens the immune system, slows healing, and impairs judgment, all potentially fatal disadvantages in a profession that requires peak physical and mental performance. Hunger creates a vicious cycle, where poor nutrition leads to diminished capacity, which reduces success rates and further limits income. Desperate hunger can lead assassins to accept contracts that are too dangerous or poorly planned, increasing the likelihood of capture or death. Weather can be deadly for someone without adequate shelter or clothing, representing a threat that affects assassins more severely than other members of medieval society. Hypothermia kills more medieval criminals than violence, and sunstroke claims its share during summer months. Flash floods, lightning strikes, and other natural disasters are particular dangers for someone who must often sleep outdoors and travel at night. The medieval worldview is fundamentally shaped by Christian theology, and even the most hardened criminals live within a framework of religious belief that judges their actions harshly. For assassins, this creates a constant internal conflict between survival and salvation, which adds psychological torture to an already difficult existence. The Catholic Church teaches that murder is one of the most grievous sins, punishable by eternal damnation. This is not merely a theoretical concern for medieval people. Hell is as real and immediate as the physical world around them. The vivid descriptions of eternal torment, preached from every pulpit, create detailed mental images of the punishment awaiting unrepentant assassins. Each kill moves the assassin farther from God's grace and closer to eternal torment, creating a spiritual debt that grows with each victim. The weight of this accumulated sin becomes a psychological burden that affects behavior and decision-making, adding guilt and despair to the practical concerns of survival. Confession offers theoretical absolution, but the sacrament requires genuine repentance and a firm intention not to repeat the sin. An assassin who kills for survival cannot honestly make this commitment, which means that confession becomes either a meaningless ritual or another layer of self-deception. Some try to game the system, confessing after each kill while planning the next, but this psychological game provides little real comfort. The concept of a just war provides some criminals with moral justification for violence, but assassination rarely fits these criteria established by church doctrine. Killing for money, regardless of the target's character, is clearly murder in the eyes of the church. The absence of formal authority, immediate threat, or proportional response makes most contract killings impossible to justify through religious reasoning. Some assassins try to convince themselves that they are serving justice by eliminating corrupt or wicked individuals, but this rationalization becomes harder to maintain when most targets are common people involved in petty disputes. The moral weight of killing innocents gradually erodes these self-justifications and leaves the assassin facing the full spiritual consequences of their actions. Religious festivals and holy days create additional complications for working assassins that go beyond simple scheduling conflicts. The church calendar is full of periods when violence is particularly forbidden, limiting opportunities for work while expenses remain constant. Some assassins use this forced downtime for planning and preparation, but others face genuine hardship during these lean periods when income stops, but bills continue. The contrast between participating in religious observances and planning assassinations creates cognitive dissonance that some find unbearable. Attending Mass while carrying weapons intended for killing creates a psychological tension that can lead to mental breakdown or desperate attempts to escape the profession. Fear of demons and supernatural punishment adds another dimension to the psychological burden that demonstrates how medieval belief systems affected even the most hardened criminals. Medieval people believed that evil deeds attract demonic attention and that unrepentant sinners can be tormented by malevolent spirits even before death. Some assassins report nightmares, hallucinations, and other phenomena that they interpret as supernatural punishment for their crimes. These supernatural fears can be as debilitating as physical threats, creating paranoia and anxiety that interfere with professional effectiveness. The belief that demons are literally watching and waiting to claim their souls adds an urgency to the spiritual crisis that most assassins eventually face. Now, let's pause for a moment and consider your current reality as you rest in the comfort and safety of your modern world. As you lie in your warm, comfortable bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of central heating and the soft glow of streetlights filtering through proper glass windows, the contrast with this medieval nightmare could not be more stark. Think about the simple luxury of clean, running water available at the turn of a tap. The medieval assassin we've been following has never experienced anything like the pure, safe water that flows from your faucet on demand. Every drop he drinks is a gamble with disease and death, while you can fill a glass with crystal clear water without a second thought about its safety or purity. Consider the miracle of modern medicine that protects you from the infections and diseases that constantly threaten medieval lives. A simple antibiotic can cure conditions that would be death sentences in the 11th century. Your dentist can painlessly correct problems that would cause months of agony for a medieval person. The vaccines in your system protect you from plagues that regularly devastated entire populations. Your biggest daily worry might be traffic on your commute to work, a difficult email from your boss, or deciding what to watch on one of the countless streaming services. Meanwhile, a medieval assassin wakes up each day wondering if he will find work, if his next target will fight back effectively enough to kill him, if the city guard has discovered his identity, or if he will simply die of disease or exposure before any of those other threats materialize. The food in your refrigerator represents an abundance that would seem miraculous to someone from the medieval period. Fresh fruits and vegetables from all over the world, meat that has been safely processed and preserved, and dairy products that will not cause illness. All of this represents a level of food security that was unimaginable to our ancestors. But there is so much more to this story that we have yet to explore. The world of the medieval assassin contains depths of desperation and horror that we have only begun to uncover. The techniques they developed for survival, the networks of information and corruption that sustained their shadowy trade, and the specific methods they used to approach and eliminate targets all represent a grim curriculum of human desperation that shaped the development of professional killing. Tomorrow night, we will delve deeper into this dark world, exploring the actual techniques these desperate souls used to hunt human prey in the narrow streets and dark alleys of medieval cities. We will examine how they selected targets, gathered intelligence, and planned their approaches. We will discover the crude but effective methods they developed for disposing of bodies and escaping detection. We will explore the underground networks that connected criminals across vast distances, the coded languages they used to communicate, and the informal systems of apprenticeship that passed knowledge from one generation of assassins to the next. The relationship between assassination and medieval politics will reveal how individual acts of violence shaped the course of history. While the stories of specific assassins will illuminate the human tragedy behind the statistics, the seasonal patterns of violence, the regional variations in technique, and the gradual evolution of law enforcement will show how this grim profession adapted to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. But for now, rest comfortably in your warm bed, grateful for the safety and abundance that surround you, knowing that tomorrow night we will continue this journey into the shadows of human history. Part 2 awaits with even darker revelations about the methods, the madness, and the ultimate fate of those who chose to make a living through death in the brutal world of medieval Europe. And here we are again, plunging even deeper into the murky waters of medieval existence. If you thought the life of a medieval assassin had already revealed all its horrors, prepare to discover that we were only scratching the surface of a much deeper and darker abyss. Imagine yourself lying in your comfortable bed right now, surrounded by the gentle warmth of your home, the soft glow of modern lighting, and the silent hum of technology that keeps you safe and comfortable. Hold on to that feeling, because we are about to travel to a world where such simple luxuries were not just unavailable. They were literally unimaginable. The morning of a medieval assassin begins before dawn, not by choice, but by necessity. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and constantly interrupted by the sounds of danger. The creaking of wooden buildings settling in the cold, the scuttling of rats through the walls, the distant shouts of the night watch, and the ever-present fear that this might be the night when enemies finally track you down. Every sound can signal approaching death. Imagine waking up in complete darkness because candles are a luxury you can't afford, and windows, if they exist, are covered with animal hides or crude wooden shutters that block out all light. The air you breathe is thick with damp, mold, and the accumulated odors of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and human waste. Your first breath each morning is a reminder of how far you have fallen from any semblance of normal human existence. Your sleeping space, if you can call it that, consists of moldy straw laid directly on the cold dirt floor. The straw, when you can get it, hasn't been changed in weeks or months. It has become a breeding ground for fleas, lice, and countless other parasites that feed on your blood throughout the night. The constant itching and the red welts covering your body are just part of the price you pay for having a place to lay your head. The walls around you, if you are lucky enough to have walls, are made of rough timber with gaps wide enough to stick your fingers through. These gaps allow wind, rain, and snow to enter freely, making temperature control impossible. In winter, the cold is so intense that you can see your breath even indoors, and ice forms on the inside of any barrier separating you from the outside world. In summer, the enclosed space becomes a suffocating furnace with no ventilation, trapping heat and intensifying every foul odor. But the physical discomfort pales in comparison to the psychological torment that begins the moment conscious thought returns each day. The first thought that enters your mind isn't about breakfast, plans for the day, or hopes for the future. It's a quick mental inventory of immediate threats. Are the city guards looking for you? Has the family of your last victim organized a hunting party? Do any of your criminal associates have a reason to turn you in for a reward? Have you developed symptoms of the plague or some other fatal illness? This constant state of hypervigilance creates a mental exhaustion that goes beyond simple tiredness. Your mind never gets to rest, never gets to process normal, peaceful thoughts. Every waking moment of every day is consumed with risk calculations, escape plans, and survival strategies. The psychological weight of maintaining this level of alertness gradually erodes your sanity, creating a paranoid worldview where everyone is a potential enemy and nowhere is safe. As you attempt to make yourself presentable for whatever the day may bring, the limitations of medieval hygiene become brutally apparent. There is no running water, no soap as we understand it today, no deodorant, no toothpaste, and certainly no shower or bathtub. Personal cleaning, when it is achieved, is through cold water drawn from questionable sources and rough cloth that serves multiple purposes for extended periods. Your clothing, if it can be called that, consists of coarsely woven cloth that never fits properly and is rarely, if ever, washed. The same garments are worn for weeks or months at a time, gradually accumulating layers of sweat, blood, mud, and other substances that create a distinctive and unpleasant aroma. This smell becomes your signature, announcing your presence long before you become visible and making stealth increasingly difficult as time goes on. The absence of modern dental care means that your teeth, if you still have them, are likely broken, rotting, or causing constant pain. Dental abscesses are common and often fatal, turning a simple toothache into a deadly infection. The chronic pain from dental problems affects your ability to eat, sleep, and concentrate, adding another layer of suffering to an already unbearable existence. Many assassins lose teeth to violence, malnutrition, or disease, leaving them with limited capacity to process food and a speech impediment that makes communication more difficult. Your hands, the tools of your deadly trade, tell their own story of hardship and violence. They are permanently stained with blood, dirt, and other substances that no amount of scrubbing can completely remove. The skin is cracked and scarred from countless fights, injuries, and exposure to harsh conditions. Your fingernails, if they haven't been torn off in struggles, are black with accumulated filth and often infected from small cuts that fail to heal properly in such unsanitary conditions. Breakfast, when it exists, consists of whatever scraps you've managed to obtain through begging, stealing, or payment from previous jobs. Bread, if available, is dark, dense, and often moldy, baked with inferior flour and whatever additives might extend its shelf life. The texture is more like hardened clay than food, requiring significant effort to tear apart and even more effort to chew and swallow. Meat is a rare luxury, and when available, it is often from animals that died of disease or have been dead long enough to develop a questionable odor. Preservation methods in the medieval period rely on salt, smoking, or simply hoping that winter temperatures will prevent spoilage. Without refrigeration, meat becomes a gamble with food, poisoning, which can be fatal for someone without access to medical care. Vegetables and fruits are seasonal luxuries that disappear completely during the winter months. When available, they are often wilted, wormy, or partially rotten, but still consumed because any nutrition is better than none. The lack of vitamin C leads to scurvy, causing teeth to fall out, old wounds to reopen, and a general weakening of the body that makes survival even more challenging. Water, the most basic necessity of Life is a constant source of danger for medieval assassins. Clean, safe drinking water is virtually non-existent in urban areas, where human and animal waste contaminate rivers, wells, and every other water source. The choice is often between drinking potentially deadly water or dying of thirst, and both options carry significant risks of disease and death. Beer and ale are often safer alternatives to water, but they are expensive and require connections to legitimate merchants who may refuse to do business with known criminals. The low alcohol content kills some bacteria, making these beverages less likely to cause immediate illness. But constant consumption of alcohol, even weak alcohol, impairs judgment and reflexes in ways that can be fatal in a profession that demands peak performance. The search for work begins by venturing into the most dangerous parts of already dangerous cities. Assassins must make themselves known to potential clients without revealing their identity to authorities or rivals, a delicate balance that requires navigating complex networks of criminal contacts and corrupt officials. These negotiations often take place in taverns, brothels, or abandoned buildings, where the risk of betrayal or violence is constant. Potential clients are themselves criminals, corrupt nobles, or desperate merchants with their own agendas and limited loyalty. They may promise payment they have no intention of delivering, set up traps for assassins to be caught by authorities, or simply lie about the nature and difficulty of the job. Trust is impossible in these relationships, yet assassins must somehow evaluate offers and make decisions based on incomplete and potentially false information. The targets themselves present another layer of complexity that goes far beyond the simple act of killing. Medieval nobles and wealthy merchants do not move unprotected. They travel with armed guards, live in fortified buildings, and surround themselves with loyal servants who would raise alarms at the first sign of danger. Approaching such targets requires extensive planning, inside information, and often weeks or months of patient observation. Gathering intelligence on targets means infiltrating social circles, bribing servants, or finding other sources of information on daily routines, security measures, and vulnerabilities. This investigative phase is often more dangerous than the actual assassination, as it requires the assassin to interact with people who may recognize them, remember their faces, or become suspicious of their questions. The tools of the trade are crude by modern standards, but they are lethally effective when used properly. Knives and daggers must be concealable, but easily accessible, sharp enough to penetrate clothing and leather armor, and reliable enough to function in the worst conditions. Maintaining these weapons requires constant attention, sharpening, cleaning, and repairing them with limited resources and tools. Poison, when available, offers the advantage of distance and subtle effects, but obtaining lethal substances in medieval times requires knowledge, connections, and significant risk. Many commonly available plants and fungi contain deadly toxins, but the dosage and preparation methods require expertise that is difficult to acquire and dangerous to practice. Failed attempts at poisoning often alert targets to their danger and make future approaches impossible. The actual moment of the assassination, despite being the defining act of the profession, represents only a small fraction of an assassin's time and energy. The hours, days, or weeks of preparation culminate in a few seconds of intense violence, followed immediately by the desperate need to escape before discovery. Success in the kill itself means nothing if capture follows, and the margin for error is virtually non-existent. Escape routes must be planned in advance, but medieval cities offer limited options for rapid movement. Streets are narrow, winding, and often blocked by market stalls, animal carts, or crowds of people. Buildings are packed together with few spaces between them, and city gates are guarded by watchmen who can trap fleeing criminals inside the walls. Knowledge of sewers, abandoned buildings, and secret passages becomes essential, but this information is carefully guarded and dangerous to acquire. The disposal of evidence, particularly weapons and bloodied clothes, presents continuous challenges in an environment where nothing can simply be thrown away and forgotten. Weapons are valuable and difficult to replace, yet they become liabilities if they can be connected to specific crimes. Blood-soaked clothes must be cleaned or destroyed, but replacement clothes are expensive and difficult to obtain without attracting attention. Body disposal, when necessary, requires knowledge of local geography, access to remote locations, and the physical ability to transport dead weight without being observed. Rivers, forests, and abandoned buildings serve as dumping grounds, but each option carries risks of discovery and identification. Bodies have a tendency to surface, be found by searchers, or provide evidence that leads back to the assassin. Payment for completed contracts, assuming payment arrives at all, is often less than promised and delivered in forms that create additional problems. Coins may be traceable. Jewelry must be fenced through criminal contacts who demand significant percentages, and goods must be converted into usable resources through networks that expose the assassin to additional risks of betrayal. Even the successful completion of contracts brings new dangers instead of relief. Satisfied clients may decide that eliminating the assassin removes the only witness to their crimes. Rivals may see successful assassins as threats to be eliminated before they become too powerful or well-connected. The very success that provides income and reputation also paints targets on the backs of those who achieve it. The relationship between assassins and other criminals is complicated by competition, distrust, and the general unreliability of people operating outside of legal systems. Thieves see assassins as potential victims who may be carrying payment from recent jobs. Smugglers worry that associating with assassins will attract unwanted attention from authorities. Even prostitutes, who serve the most desperate and dangerous clients, often refuse to deal with known assassins out of fear of violence or legal consequences. Criminal information networks operate on the basis of mutual benefit and shared risk, but assassins occupy a unique position that makes normal criminal relationships difficult. They know too much about their clients to be completely trusted, yet they need too much help to operate independently. This creates a constant tension, where assassins must reveal just enough about their activities to maintain useful contacts, while hiding enough to protect themselves from betrayal. Corruption among authorities provides some protection for criminals willing and able to pay bribes, but assassins face unique challenges in these relationships. City guards and court officials are willing to overlook theft, smuggling, or prostitution in exchange for regular payments, but murder carries political and religious implications that make officials reluctant to appear complicit. The amounts needed to purchase protection from murder charges are often beyond what most assassins can afford, and the officials capable of providing such protection are exactly the people most likely to betray criminals for political advantage. The seasonal nature of medieval life creates additional complications for working assassins that affect every aspect of their survival strategy. Winter brings cold that kills through exposure, but also provides cover for movement and hides evidence under snow and ice. Summer offers heat and longer hours of daylight, but bodies decompose quickly in the heat, creating both health risks and evidence that is difficult to hide. Spring and autumn bring their own challenges as agricultural cycles affect the movement of people and goods through medieval society. Harvest times concentrate populations in rural areas, while planting seasons empty cities of laborers. These population shifts affect both the availability of targets and the presence of witnesses, requiring assassins to adapt their methods and timing to match the rhythms of medieval life. Religious festivals and holy days create periods when normal business stops, guards are reduced, and populations gather in predictable locations. These events offer opportunities for access to targets, but they also raise the religious and political consequences of violence committed during sacred times. Killing during Easter or Christmas carries an additional spiritual weight that affects even the most hardened criminals, while also bringing more severe punishment from both the church and secular authorities. The geographical mobility required by the profession creates a constant cycle of displacement that prevents assassins from establishing stable bases of operation. Cities become dangerous after jobs are completed, requiring movement to new locations where connections must be rebuilt and territories learned from scratch. This constant movement makes it impossible to develop the relationships and local knowledge that provide security and opportunity in criminal enterprises. Travel between cities in medieval times is dangerous for legitimate travelers and potentially fatal for criminals with prices on their heads. Roads are infested with bandits who prey on anyone appearing to carry valuables, while official checkpoints and city gates are watched by guards who may recognize wanted faces. Rivers offer alternative routes but require boats, knowledge of water conditions, and the ability to fend off pirates and river bandits. The lack of reliable maps and the absence of standardized road systems make navigation a constant challenge for traveling assassins. Getting lost in unfamiliar territory can be fatal when being pursued by enemies or when supplies run out in remote areas. Local guides are necessary but unreliable, often leading travelers into ambushes or simply abandoning them in dangerous wilderness. Weather conditions that merely inconvenience modern travelers can be deadly for medieval assassins. Traveling without shelter or adequate supplies, storms, floods, and extreme temperatures claim lives regularly, while seasonal changes can trap travelers in remote areas for weeks or months. The inability to predict weather conditions or prepare for emergencies makes every journey a gamble with death. The psychological impact of constant travel adds another layer to the mental exhaustion that characterizes an assassin's life. Never having a place to truly call home, never developing lasting relationships, and never feeling secure in familiar surroundings creates a form of psychological homelessness that affects decision-making and emotional stability. The human need for belonging and community is never satisfied, leading to depression and despair that compound the other challenges of survival. Medical care, when injuries or illnesses occur, is limited to whatever folk remedies may be available from other criminals or sympathetic individuals willing to help. Professional physicians serve the rich and refuse to treat known criminals, while barber surgeons who may provide basic wound care often lack the skills to deal with serious injuries. Religious hospitals and monasteries provide charitable care, but assassins risk exposure to authorities who cooperate with church officials. Pain management relies on alcohol, which numbs sensations but impairs judgment, or herbal remedies that may be ineffective or actually poisonous. Infection is a constant threat that can turn minor injuries into fatal complications within days. The absence of antibiotics means that even small cuts can lead to blood poisoning, while broken bones that heal improperly create permanent disabilities that affect fighting ability and mobility. Mental health problems that we now recognize as natural responses to trauma and stress were completely misunderstood in medieval times. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress were interpreted as spiritual failings, demonic possession, or simple weakness of character. Assassins suffering from these conditions had no access to treatment or even understanding, forcing them to deal with deteriorating mental health through the same alcohol and violence that created their problems in the first place. Sleep, when it comes, is haunted by nightmares that replay violent encounters and anticipate future threats. The faces of victims appear in dreams, sometimes seeking revenge, sometimes pleading for mercy that was never given. These psychological manifestations of guilt and fear create a cycle where rest becomes as tormented as waking hours, preventing the mental recovery that healthy sleep provides. The absence of any legitimate path back to normal society creates a hopelessness that affects every decision and relationship. Once marked as an assassin, no legitimate trade guild will accept members, no respectable merchant will extend credit, and no normal woman will consider marriage. This sentence of social death means that every choice deepens the commitment to a criminal life, making escape increasingly impossible as time goes on. The legal systems of medieval times offer no concept of rehabilitation or second chances for those convicted of serious crimes. Justice is based on punishment and deterrence rather than reform, meaning that capture inevitably leads to execution, often preceded by torture designed to extract confessions and information on accomplices. The prospect of legal mercy does not exist for assassins, making every encounter with authorities a potentially fatal one. The few assassins who attempt to escape their profession face obstacles that make success almost impossible. Legitimate employment requires references and connections that criminals cannot provide. Starting over in distant locations requires resources and skills that years of criminal life have prevented them from developing. The psychological damage of years of violence and isolation makes normal social relationships difficult or impossible to maintain. Some try to find refuge in religious institutions, seeking sanctuary and redemption through monastic life or pilgrimage. However, the Church's requirement for genuine repentance conflicts with the survival instincts that have kept assassins alive. True repentance requires confession of specific crimes, which creates legal vulnerabilities, while false repentance provides no real spiritual comfort or psychological healing. The rare instances of successful escape from the assassin's life typically require extraordinary circumstances: the death of all enemies, the collapse of criminal networks that might betray them, significant changes in political leadership that offer amnesty, or the acquisition of enough wealth to completely change identity and location. These circumstances are so unlikely that most assassins die in their profession rather than escape it. Financial planning and saving for the future are impossible when the survival of each day requires immediate resources and attention. The concept of retirement does not exist for medieval assassins, who either die violently or become too old and weak to continue working, at which point they face starvation or death from exposure. There is no pension system, no family support network, and no accumulated wealth to sustain old age. The physical demands of the profession create wear and tear that accumulates over time, reducing effectiveness and increasing vulnerability. Joints damaged in fights. Develop arthritis that limits mobility. Wounds that heal improperly create permanent weakness. The constant stress and poor nutrition accelerate aging, making 40-year-old assassins look and feel like 60 or 70-year-old men in modern terms. Now, as you lie in your comfortable bed, surrounded by the warmth and security of modern life, consider the miracle of your daily existence. The water flowing from your tap is cleaner and safer than anything a medieval assassin could ever imagine. The food in your refrigerator represents an abundance that would seem magical to someone from that era. The medical care available to you can cure illnesses and injuries that were automatic death sentences in medieval times. Your biggest worries may involve work deadlines, relationship problems, or financial concerns, but these challenges exist within systems designed to provide solutions and support. You have legal protections, social safety nets, and institutional resources that can help address whatever difficulties you face. Even your worst days occur within a framework of civilization that provides basic security and opportunity. The simple act of lying in a clean, comfortable bed in a temperature-controlled and well-lit room, surrounded by possessions you legally own and secure in the knowledge that you can sleep safely until tomorrow, represents a level of luxury and security that medieval assassins could never achieve. Your physical safety is protected by laws and institutions rather than by your personal ability to commit violence. The food you eat is not only abundant, but safe, nutritious, and available year-round, regardless of the season or local conditions. You do not need to worry about poisoning, contamination, or scarcity in ways that would be understandable to someone from medieval times. The variety and quality of nutrition available to you sustain health and longevity that medieval people would consider miraculous. Your social connections and relationships exist within communities that offer support rather than constant threat. The people around you are not assessing you as potential victims, threats, or sources of betrayal. Trust is possible because institutions and laws create frameworks for reliable behavior and consequences for violations. Resources for mental health, medical care, education, and opportunities for personal growth exist at levels that would be incomprehensible to medieval assassins. Your problems, however significant they may seem, occur within systems designed to provide solutions rather than in a void where only violence and despair offer any hope of change. The freedom to choose your profession, to change your circumstances, and to build a better future represents possibilities that medieval assassins never had. Your mistakes do not create permanent social exile, and your circumstances do not trap you in cycles of violence and degradation from which escape is impossible. As you drift towards sleep in your warm, safe bed, remember that the security surrounding you is not just physical, but also social, legal, and institutional. You live within networks of support and protection that took centuries to develop and represent the accumulated wisdom of human civilization, working to create better lives for everyone. The medieval assassins whose lives we have explored existed in a world where such support did not exist, where every day was a struggle for survival, and where the only escape from misery was death itself. Their suffering serves as a reminder of how far human society has progressed, and how fortunate we are to live in times when violence is not the only solution to problems, and where hope for better futures is realistic rather than a fantasy. Rest peacefully tonight, grateful for the civilization that protects you, the abundance that surrounds you, and the possibilities that await you tomorrow. The darkness that enveloped medieval assassins has been replaced by the light of human progress, and you are among the beneficiaries of centuries of effort to create a better world. The tools of violence that define an assassin's existence tell stories of desperation, crude ingenuity that modern minds can barely comprehend. Unlike today's world where weapons are manufactured with precision engineering and quality control, medieval assassins relied on crude implements that were often improvised from common tools or built by blacksmiths who asked no questions and provided no guarantees. A typical assassin's knife might start life as a kitchen implement, an agricultural tool, or a craftsman's blade before being modified for its deadly purpose. The conversion process involves shortening the blade for concealment, sharpening the point for penetration, and wrapping the handle with leather strips to prevent slippage during use. These modifications are performed with basic tools under poor lighting conditions, often resulting in weapons that are functional but far from reliable. The steel itself, when it can be obtained, varies widely in quality depending on the blacksmith's skill and the materials available. Iron ore was processed using techniques that produced metal with inconsistent carbon content, resulting in blades that may be too soft to hold an edge or too hard and brittle to withstand impact. A weapon that fails at a crucial moment means certain death for its wielder, yet assassins have no choice but to rely on whatever implements they can obtain. Sharpening these weapons becomes a constant concern that requires both skill and resources that are often unavailable. Whetstones wear out with use and must be replaced, but buying them requires money and contact with merchants who may remember faces and ask uncomfortable questions. The alternative is to use whatever rough stones can be found, which often damage blades more than they improve them. The maintenance of weapons in medieval conditions presents challenges that go beyond simple sharpening. Blood, when it dries on metal, becomes corrosive and can permanently damage blades if not cleaned immediately. However, cleaning weapons requires access to water and scrubbing materials, luxuries that are often unavailable after completing a job. The choice becomes one of preserving the weapon or escaping quickly, and survival usually takes precedence over equipment care. Rust represents a constant threat that can render weapons useless within days of exposure to dampness. Medieval iron lacks the corrosion resistance of modern alloys, making every rainstorm a potential disaster for an assassin's equipment. Oil for rust protection is expensive and difficult to obtain, while alternatives like animal fat can become rancid and create distinctive odors that betray an assassin's presence. The weight and balance of improvised weapons create additional challenges for users who lack formal training or quality equipment. A blade that is too heavy becomes difficult to wield in extended fights, while one that is too light lacks the momentum needed to penetrate thick clothing or leather armor. The balance point affects accuracy and control, but most assassins rarely have multiple weapons available for comparison or selection. Weapon concealment requires constant creativity and adaptability that would challenge even modern criminals with access to sophisticated hiding techniques. Medieval clothing lacks the pockets, compartments, and specialized fittings that modern apparel provides for hiding objects. Weapons must be strapped against the body using crude harnesses, hidden in boots or sleeves, or carried in ways that do not create obvious bulges or restrict movement. The sounds that weapons make during movement can betray an assassin's presence long before visual detection occurs. Metal scraping against metal, leather creaking under tension, or the subtle click of poorly secured implements can alert guards or victims to approaching danger. Silence requires careful preparation and constant attention to every detail of equipment arrangement. Weather conditions affect weapon performance in ways that modern users never experience. Rain makes handles slick and reduces grip security, while cold weather can make metal so brittle that blades break under the stress of normal use. Heat causes metal to expand, potentially loosening fitted components, while humidity accelerates rust formation. Assassins must adapt their techniques and equipment to seasonal conditions without the benefit of climate-controlled storage or maintenance facilities. The psychological relationship between assassins and their weapons develops into a complex dependency that affects mental health and decision-making processes. These crude implements represent the only reliable means of survival in a hostile world, creating emotional attachments that go beyond simple tool use. The loss or damage of a weapon can trigger panic responses that compromise judgment and lead to fatal mistakes. Weapon training, when it occurs at all, happens under conditions that make skill development extremely difficult. There are no formal schools, experienced instructors, or safe practice environments for learning combat techniques. Knowledge is passed on informally between criminals, learned through trial and error during actual conflicts, or acquired through observation of others fighting for their lives. Practice sessions must be conducted in secret locations where the sounds of combat will not attract attention from authorities or rivals. Abandoned buildings, remote areas outside city walls, or underground chambers provide some privacy, but these spaces lack adequate lighting, ventilation, or safety features. Injuries sustained during practice receive no medical attention, often becoming infected and creating permanent disabilities. The absence of protective gear during training means that every practice session carries risks of serious injury or death. Without padded armor, protective masks, or safety weapons, students learn by receiving real injuries and inflicting real damage on their sparring partners. This creates a brutal educational system where survival depends more on luck than on skill development. Sparring partners are often as desperate and dangerous as the students themselves, creating training environments where cooperation is fragile and betrayal is always a possibility. The knowledge that your practice partner may become your enemy tomorrow affects the willingness to share techniques or reveal weaknesses, limiting the educational value of these interactions. The development of fighting skills occurs primarily through real combat rather than controlled practice, meaning that every encounter is simultaneously a learning experience and a life or death struggle. Mistakes during these real fights are not corrected by instructors, they are punished by injury or death. This creates a selection process where only those with natural aptitude or extraordinary luck survive, long enough to become competent. The combat techniques themselves are crude and brutal compared to the refined martial arts that developed in more stable societies. Medieval assassin fighting focuses on ending conflicts quickly through overwhelming violence rather than on demonstrating skill or following rules of engagement. The goal is always to kill or incapacitate opponents as quickly as possible, using whatever methods prove effective, regardless of honor or sporting considerations. The close-quarters nature of most assassination attempts requires techniques that work in confined spaces with limited room for movement. Medieval buildings have low ceilings, narrow doorways, and cramped rooms that restrict the use of long weapons or techniques requiring extensive footwork. Fighting skills must be adapted to work in alleys, stairwells, and small chambers where environmental factors play important roles in determining outcomes. Multiple opponents present challenges that require different techniques and strategies than single combat, but training for these situations is nearly impossible without risking injury to multiple practice partners simultaneously. Group fighting involves coordination, timing, and spatial awareness that can only be developed through experience. Yet the cost of gaining that experience is often fatal. The integration of weapons with unarmed combat creates additional complexity that requires years of practice to master. Knowing when to draw a weapon, how to transition between armed and unarmed techniques, and maintaining control of the weapon during grappling exchanges are skills that develop slowly under the best conditions. For medieval assassins learning through violent encounters, these skills must be acquired quickly or not at all. Armor, when encountered on targets or opponents, requires specialized knowledge and techniques that are difficult to acquire without formal military training. Understanding the weak points in different types of armor, the proper angles for attack, and the force required to penetrate protective gear can mean the difference between success and failure at critical moments. The psychology of violence affects assassins differently than soldiers or other fighters who engage in combat within structured contexts. Military personnel fight as part of units with clear objectives and support systems, while assassins operate alone against opponents who may be innocent of any wrongdoing. This isolation and moral ambiguity creates psychological pressures that compound the physical stresses of combat. Fear management becomes a crucial skill that receives no formal training or support systems. Medieval assassins must learn to function effectively while experiencing terror, rage, and other extreme emotions that impair judgment and physical performance. The ability to remain calm and focused during life-threatening encounters determines survival, yet developing this mental discipline requires experience that often proves fatal to acquire. The aftermath of violent encounters creates additional challenges that extend far beyond the immediate physical consequences. Bodies must be dealt with properly to avoid discovery. Evidence must be eliminated or concealed, and escape routes must be executed while dealing with adrenaline, injury, and emotional trauma. These post-combat activities are as dangerous as the fights themselves, but receive even less preparation or training. Wound. Treatment after combat depends on crude techniques and materials that often cause more harm than healing. Without an understanding of infection control, antiseptics, or proper wound care, even minor injuries can become life-threatening complications. Major injuries that would be easily treatable with modern medical care often result in death from blood loss, infection, or shock. The economic aspects of assassination work create a business model that guarantees poverty and desperation for all but the most successful practitioners. Clients who hire assassins are themselves criminals, corrupt officials, or desperate individuals with limited resources and questionable reliability. Payment is often delayed, reduced from promised amounts, or provided in forms that create additional problems for the recipient. Negotiating contracts requires skills that most assassins never develop, as their backgrounds typically lack experience in business, legal agreements, or financial planning. The absence of enforceable contracts means that disputes over payment can only be settled through violence, creating additional risks and potential enemies for assassins who are already vulnerable to betrayal. The pricing of assassination services reflects the desperation of both clients and providers, rather than rational market forces. Clients needing assassination services are often in crisis situations that impair their judgment and willingness to pay reasonable amounts. Assassins driven by immediate sales. Survival needs often accept contracts that pay too little to justify the enormous risks involved. Competition among assassins drives prices down while simultaneously increasing the dangers of the profession. Rival assassins may undercut each other's prices, provide information to authorities about competitors, or simply eliminate competition through direct violence. This creates a market environment where success often depends more on eliminating competitors than on serving clients effectively. The methods of payment available in medieval times create additional complications for assassins trying to convert their services into useful resources. Coins can be traced back to their sources, particularly when unusual denominations or foreign currencies are involved. Jewels and other valuables must be converted into cash through criminal networks that demand significant percentages and expose assassins to additional risks of betrayal. Bartering services for goods or other favors creates relationships and obligations that can become liabilities over time. Accepting payment in the form of weapons, shelter, or food creates dependencies on specific individuals who may later use that leverage for their own purposes. The inability to keep transactions simple and money-based complicates every business relationship and creates ongoing vulnerabilities. The seasonal nature of the medieval economy affects the availability of work and clients in ways that create feast or famine cycles for assassins. Harvest times bring prosperity to agricultural communities, but concentrate populations in rural areas where assassination opportunities are limited. Winter reduces travel and trade, limiting the movement of wealthy targets while increasing the desperation of potential clients who cannot pay well. Political changes can eliminate entire categories of clients overnight while creating new opportunities that require different skills and connections. The death of a corrupt official can end lucrative relationships, while their replacement brings new demands for service. Wars, famines, and other large-scale events create chaos that both increases demand for assassination services and makes the collection of payment more difficult. The geographical factors that influence assassination work create territorial considerations that affect both opportunity and safety. Every city, region, and political jurisdiction has its own criminal networks, corrupt officials, and law enforcement, practices that must be learned and navigated carefully. Knowledge that is valuable in one location may be useless or dangerous in another. Border regions and areas with competing authorities offer both opportunities and additional dangers for working assassins. Political instability creates demand for assassination services while simultaneously making legal consequences unpredictable. Clients may disappear across borders after hiring assassins, while law enforcement cooperation can extend pursuit beyond traditional jurisdictional boundaries. Urban environments provide more opportunities for both work and concealment, but also concentrate law enforcement resources and create more witnesses to criminal activity. Rural areas offer fewer targets, but more space for disposing of evidence and escaping pursuit. The choice between urban and rural operations affects every aspect of an assassin's methodology and survival strategy. Transportation networks and trade routes create patterns of movement that assassins must understand to intercept targets or escape pursuit effectively. Knowledge of road conditions, seasonal variations, and political factors that affect travel becomes essential for planning operations and avoiding capture. This intelligence gathering requires time, resources, and contacts that are difficult for isolated criminals to develop and maintain. The social dynamics of medieval communities create networks of surveillance that modern criminals never encounter. Everyone knows their neighbors, strangers are immediately noticed and questioned, and unusual activity attracts attention that can quickly reach authorities. Operating in these close-knit communities requires different skills and strategies than working in anonymous urban environments. Religious and cultural practices create schedules and patterns of gathering that can be exploited for access to targets, but also create moral and practical complications for assassins operating within these systems. Violating sacred spaces or times brings additional consequences beyond simple legal prosecution, while participating in religious activities creates opportunities for recognition and betrayal. The family and clan structures that dominated medieval society extend protection and obligations of revenge far beyond immediate relatives, creating networks of enemies that can persist for generations after individual assassinations. Killing one person often triggers obligations of response for dozens of relatives, friends, and associates who may seek vengeance regardless of their personal involvement in the original conflict. Marriage alliances and business partnerships create complex webs of relationships that can turn allies into enemies or vice versa, based on shifting circumstances that assassins may not understand or anticipate. The consequences of individual assassinations ripple through these social networks in ways that create ongoing dangers and complicate future operations. Legal systems based on personal relationships rather than institutional procedures mean that justice depends more on social connections than on evidence or proper procedures. Assassins who lack influential friends or family support have no protection against false accusations, while those with powerful enemies face predetermined guilty verdicts regardless of actual innocence. The concept of collective responsibility means that communities, guilds, or families can be held accountable for the actions of individual members, creating pressure for these groups to police their own members and to exclude those who bring unwanted attention. This social mechanism makes it difficult for assassins to maintain connections with legitimate society, even when they attempt to reform or escape their criminal pasts. Now, as you rest in the warmth and safety of your modern home, take a moment to truly appreciate the miracle of your daily existence. The simple act of turning a tap brings clean, safe water flowing into your home. water that has been treated, tested, and guaranteed safe for consumption. A medieval assassin would have considered this divine magic, as they faced constant risks of disease and death from every drop they consumed. Your refrigerator contains food from all over the world, preserved at perfect temperatures and protected from contamination by systems that maintain safety standards unimaginable in medieval times. You can eat strawberries in winter, meat that has been safely processed and stored, and dairy products that will not cause illness. This abundance represents a security that medieval people could never achieve, regardless of their wealth or status. The medical care available to you can cure diseases that killed millions in medieval times. It can repair injuries that would have meant permanent disability or death, and it can prevent illnesses through vaccinations that protect you from plagues that regularly devastated entire populations. A simple prescription of antibiotics can treat infections that would have been automatic death sentences for medieval assassins. Your legal system, whatever its flaws, provides due process, representation, and appeal processes that protect even the most despised criminals from the arbitrary justice that characterized medieval law enforcement. The concept that accused persons deserve fair trials and legal representation was incomprehensible to medieval societies, where justice depended on social status and personal connections. The education you have received, the books you can read, and the information available through modern technology represent opportunities for learning that would have been reserved for the highest levels of medieval society. The knowledge you take for granted about health, science, geography, and human rights exceeds what medieval scholars spent lifetimes trying to acquire. Your freedom to choose your profession, to change your circumstances, and to pursue happiness exists within economic and social systems designed to provide opportunities rather than to trap people in hereditary roles determined by the circumstances of birth. Medieval assassins had no such options. Their criminal status created permanent exile from legitimate society, with no possibility of redemption or change. The safety of your neighborhood, protected by professional law enforcement operating under legal constraints and public oversight, creates an environment where violence is the exception rather than the daily reality. You can walk the streets without carrying weapons, sleep without guards, and trust that tomorrow will bring opportunities rather than threats. Your relationships exist within communities that offer genuine support during hardships, rather than viewing every interaction through the lens of potential betrayal or exploitation. The people around you are not constantly assessing you as threats to be eliminated, victims to be exploited, or sources of information that could be sold to enemies. Unlike the shadowy taverns of a medieval city, trust becomes possible not just because of personal virtue, but because robust institutions exist to provide meaningful recourse when that trust is violated. Courts of law, rather than the edge of a blade, determine justice. Contracts are enforced through legal mechanisms rather than violence, and disputes are resolved through established procedures that protect all parties involved. This network of social trust extends far beyond immediate relationships. The merchant who sells you bread does not fear that you might kill him for his coins. The neighbor who borrows your tools returns them not out of terror of retaliation, but because social norms and legal frameworks support honest dealings. Children can play in the streets without parents fearing they will be kidnapped and sold into slavery or forced to serve as disposable soldiers. The very concept of neighborhood watch groups represents communal cooperation that would have been impossible in medieval times, when strangers were automatically suspected and communities were isolated strongholds of mutual suspicion. Even your problems, however serious and overwhelming they may feel in the moment, occur within sophisticated systems specifically designed to provide solutions and support. Financial difficulties can be addressed through legal mechanisms, bankruptcy courts, consumer protection agencies, financial counseling services, and social safety nets that prevent destitution from becoming a death sentence. When medieval people faced financial ruin, they often faced literal starvation, bondage, or death. Your worst financial crisis occurs within structures that provide food assistance, housing support, access to health care, and legal protections against exploitation that did not exist for centuries of human civilization. Relationship problems can be resolved through professional counseling, mediation services, or legal separation, procedures that protect the rights of both parties and ensure a fair distribution of assets. Medieval people trapped in destructive relationships had virtually no recourse. Women especially faced potential violence, exile, or death if they tried to leave abusive situations. The concept of no-fault divorce, protection orders against domestic violence, and family courts that prioritize the well-being of children represent centuries of legal and social evolution that medieval assassins operating. Entirely outside legitimate social structures could never access or even imagine. Health issues can be treated by medical professionals who are bound by ethical codes, trained through rigorous educational standards, and dedicated to healing rather than profit extraction. When you feel ill, you can access emergency rooms that are legally unable to turn you away, specialists who have spent decades mastering their fields, and medicines that have undergone years of safety testing. Medieval people, including the most successful assassins with accumulated wealth, face death from conditions that modern medicine routinely treats: infected wounds, broken bones, fever, complications in childbirth, and countless illnesses that are now easily curable. Even the wealthiest medieval criminals could not purchase the level of medical care that modern insurance provides to common citizens. The simple luxury of sleeping peacefully in a comfortable bed in a room with precisely controlled temperature and lighting, surrounded by possessions you legally own and without fear of theft or violence, represents a level of security that medieval assassins could never achieve, regardless of their success, wealth, or notoriety. Your bedroom is not a fortress that requires constant vigilance. You do not sleep with weapons within reach, ears trained to distinguish the footsteps of enemies from those of allies. You do not wake up multiple times per night to ensure your survival until dawn. Your rest is not the fitful, shallow sleep of someone who knows that true unconsciousness can mean death. Medieval assassins, even at the height of their careers, slept in hiding places, abandoned buildings, forest caves, rented rooms under false names in establishments where no questions were asked. They slept alone, unable to trust companions who might kill them for rewards or to settle old scores. Their beds were hard ground, moldy straw, or rough wooden planks. They endured bitter cold in winter and suffocating heat in summer, with no protection from the elements beyond whatever crude shelter they could find or build. Rain meant cold, wet misery. Snow meant potential death from exposure. Their few possessions had to be portable, concealable, and constantly guarded. Your biggest daily worries may involve job stress, family obligations, or financial planning for future goals, problems that exist within comprehensive structures designed to provide solutions rather than in the void of desperate survival that characterized medieval criminal life. Job stress occurs within protections of labor law, human resources departments, and legal remedies for discrimination or unsafe workplace conditions. Your worst boss cannot execute you for disagreeing with him. Career setbacks occur within an economy that offers unemployment benefits, job retraining programs, and legal protections against discrimination based on age, gender, or race. Family obligations, while sometimes challenging, exist within social services that support struggling families, elder care programs, child protection services, mental health resources, and community support networks. When medieval families faced crises, they often faced them entirely alone. Elderly parents who could no longer work faced abandonment or starvation. Children who lost their parents became beggars, thieves, or died of exposure. Mental illness was attributed to demonic possession or moral failing, with treatment consisting of exile, imprisonment, or death. Financial planning for the future assumes the existence of stable institutions that will honor long-term commitments. Banks that will not simply steal your deposits, governments that will pay promised benefits, employers who contribute to retirement funds, and legal systems that protect your accumulated wealth. Medieval people, especially those living outside legal society, could not make such assumptions. Wealth had to be hidden, portable, and constantly defended. There were no retirement accounts, social security systems, or legal protections for accumulated assets. Old age meant poverty, vulnerability, and death, unless children could provide support. But criminal children were more likely to abandon or kill elderly parents than to care for them. Even your worst days occur within a civilization that offers genuine hope of improvement and meaningful change. Political systems, however imperfect, provide mechanisms for addressing grievances and implementing reforms. Educational opportunities exist for people to improve their circumstances through knowledge and skill development. Economic mobility, while challenging, remains possible through various paths: education, entrepreneurship, career advancement, or geographical relocation. Social movements can achieve real changes in laws, policies, and cultural attitudes through organized effort rather than violence. Medieval people, particularly those operating outside of legal society, had no such hope. Social mobility was virtually non-existent. Circumstances of birth determined life outcomes, with rare exceptions. Political change happened through conquest, assassination, or royal whim, not through democratic processes that considered the needs of common people. Education was limited to small elites, and most people remained illiterate their entire lives. Geographical mobility meant abandoning everything familiar to face unknown dangers in strange places where you had no connections, protection, or legitimate means of survival. The freedom to express opinions publicly, to practice religion according to personal beliefs, and to participate in political processes represents participation in systems that medieval people would have considered miraculous manifestations of divine power. Your voice matters in ways that were inconceivable to medieval assassins who existed entirely outside of all legitimate social structures. You can criticize government officials without facing execution. You can worship according to your conscience without being burned as a heretic. You can vote for representatives who might actually implement policies you support. Medieval assassins faced death for expressing the wrong opinions to the wrong people. Religious dissent meant torture and execution. Political participation was impossible for people outside the nobility, and even nobles who opposed the wrong rulers faced property confiscation, exile, or death. The concept that the voices of common people should influence government policies would have seemed as impossible as people flying or talking to each other across vast distances, things you take for granted in your daily life. Your access to information represents another profound difference. You can learn about events happening anywhere in the world within hours of their occurrence. You can access libraries containing millions of books, research papers, historical documents, and educational materials. You can communicate instantly with people anywhere on Earth, sharing ideas, forming communities, and organizing cooperative efforts across national borders. Medieval people, especially criminals operating in hiding, lived in isolation, with access to virtually no information beyond what they could personally observe or hear through unreliable rumors. The very concept of a police force that investigates crimes, collects evidence, and attempts to arrest rather than immediately execute suspects represents a sophisticated approach to justice that medieval societies could not achieve. While modern policing has significant flaws, it operates within legal frameworks that require evidence, allow for defense representation, and maintain standards of proof before punishment. Medieval justice, when it existed at all, was swift, brutal, and arbitrary. Suspicion often meant immediate execution, and there were no appeal processes, standards of evidence, or presumption of innocence. Your food security would have seemed magical to medieval people. Grocery stores stocked with fresh produce from all over the world, available year-round regardless of local growing seasons, represent a global supply chain that ensures you never face starvation. Restaurants that must meet health and safety standards serve food prepared by trained cooks in inspected kitchens. Even your worst dietary choices occur within regulatory frameworks that prevent obviously poisonous or contaminated food from reaching the markets. Medieval people, especially outlaws, ate whatever they could steal, hunt, or scavenge. Food poisoning was common and often fatal. Crop failures meant famine and death. Winter meant eating preserved foods that were often spoiled or nutritionally inadequate. Fresh fruits and vegetables were seasonal luxuries that most people rarely enjoyed. Meat was scarce and expensive for common people, while criminals often ate rotting scraps or went for days without eating at all. As sleep approaches tonight, carrying you gently toward rest and dreams filled with possibilities instead of nightmares of survival, remember that your comfortable bed exists within walls that protect you from weather elements that regularly killed medieval people through exposure. Your peaceful sleep occurs under the protection of systems and institutions that took centuries to develop and represent humanity's greatest achievements in creating security and opportunity for everyone, not just for powerful elites. The warm. Blankets that surround you are made from materials safely harvested by workers protected by labor laws, processed in facilities that meet safety standards, and sold through supply chains that guarantee quality and prevent exploitation. The roof over your head was built according to building codes that prevent collapse, electrical systems that prevent fires, and plumbing systems that provide clean water and sanitation. Medieval buildings collapsed regularly. Fires destroyed entire neighborhoods. And most people had no access to clean water or adequate sanitation. The medieval assassins whose desperate lives we have explored through historical records and archaeological evidence remind us that the safety, abundance, and freedom we enjoy today are not natural conditions of human existence, but rather the result of countless generations working to create better lives for their children and communities. Their suffering serves as a stark reminder of how precious and fragile our modern comforts truly are, and how much courage, wisdom, and sacrifice it took to build the civilizations that protect us today. Rest peacefully tonight, knowing that you live in a world that would have seemed like paradise to medieval people, where the simple act of sleeping safely until tomorrow represents a triumph of human civilization that we are privileged to experience every day of our lives. Your dreams tonight will carry you to possibilities that medieval people could not even imagine in a world where tomorrow genuinely offers hope for improvement, growth, and happiness. Sweet dreams, surrounded by the warmth of human progress and the promise of tomorrow's possibilities, protected by institutions that represent humanity's greatest achievements in creating justice, security, and opportunity for all.